In the summer of 1895, Theodor Herzl penned words that would unveil his ruthless and supremacist ideology to the world. He wrote, "We must expropriate private property on the state assigned to us with a gentle touch. We shall endeavour to discreetly usher the impoverished population across the border by securing employment for them in transit nations while withholding opportunities within our own borders. The property owners will gravitate to our side." This plan concealed the seeds of immeasurable suffering for countless unsuspecting individuals by systematically displacing the destitute, stripping them of employment prospects in their homeland, and coercing them to cross borders in pursuit of livelihoods. This strategy was poised to inflict deep and enduring wounds. These vulnerable populations, burdened by poverty, were destined to be further marginalized, their lives disrupted without warning. The denial of employment in their native land compelled them into unfamiliar and perhaps hostile environments, where the struggle to start anew would be formidable. Meanwhile, property owners, enticed by economic gain, turned a blind eye to the human cost of this sinister plan. This strategy was a profound moral failing, a deliberate infliction of hardship and displacement upon those least equipped to endure it. Herzl further remarked, "Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the impoverished must be executed discreetly and judiciously. You must instill in them an ideal, a belief in their future, and then you shall witness unwavering dedication to the most strenuous labor imaginable." For instance, Argentina boasts incredibly fertile soil, offering far superior conditions for agricultural work compared to Palestine. Yet in Palestine, they toil with fervor and succeed. I'm not referring to artificially created colonies, but self-sustaining communities founded on a profound national idea. This chilling agenda, shrouded in the guise of discretion and prudence, concealed a calculated scheme of expropriating property from the impoverished, while veiling its true nature. It laid bare a strategy not only of physical displacement, but of covert oppression, aiming to render the upheaval of vulnerable lives invisible. The call for clandestine operations underscored the inherent understanding of the plan's destructive consequences, a deliberate effort to evade scrutiny as lives were quietly torn apart. The depth of the plan's callousness lay not solely in the act itself, but in the systematic and concealed manner of its execution, a dark orchestration of silent devastation. Let the owners of immovable property believe that they are deceiving us, selling us things at prices exceeding their true worth. However, we shall not return anything to them. In the dawn of the 20th century, amidst the sweeping currents of global change, a complex and multifaceted plan was unfolding. This was a time when the world was grappling with the colossal forces of power, psychology, and economics, reshaping societies and nations. In this vortex of transformation, the strategic actions of Jewish settlers in Palestine emerged, aimed at consolidating their influence and assets. This period was not just a chess game of political maneuvers, but also carried deep, underlying psychological implications. The strategies implemented were perceived by many as deeply sinister, aimed at outmaneuvering the Palestinian property owners in a play of psychological and economic dominance. The Sixth Zionist Congress, held in Basel on August 26, 1903, stands as a significant milestone in this narrative. Theodor Herzl, an emblematic figure in the Zionist movement, presented the British Uganda program. This proposal was a response to the dire situation of Jews in Russia, facing relentless persecution. The Congress's decision to send a commission to examine the proposed territory in Uganda reflected a mix of urgency and pragmatism. However, this pragmatic approach was not universally accepted within the Zionist movement. Herzl and many of his contemporaries were driven by an immediate and pressing goal: to establish a Jewish state anywhere that could offer sanctuary to Europe's beleaguered Jews. For them, the geographic location was secondary to the urgent need for a safe haven, particularly for those suffering under the oppressive regime of the Russian Tsar. This aspect of the Zionist movement emphasized a humanitarian imperative, overshadowing territorial considerations. However, this approach found itself at odds with the visions of other prominent Zionist leaders such as David Ben-Gurion, Ze'ev Jabotinsky, Chaim Weizmann, and Moshe Sharet. These leaders were not only opposed to the concept of a Jewish state outside of Palestine, but they were also allegedly prepared to utilize the suffering of European Jews as a means to establish the state exclusively in Palestine. This divergence in strategy and vision caused deep rifts and moral dilemmas within the movement and raised ethical questions that reverberate to this day. The steadfast fixation of these founding fathers of Israel on Palestine, rejecting alternatives like Uganda, Argentina or Libya, has been a subject of intense debate and speculation. Their prioritization of a Jewish state in Palestine over the immediate safety of European Jews has been interpreted by some as a strategic move with profound implications. Allegations suggest that these leaders went as far as inciting anti-Semitism to create a refugee crisis, leveraging this tragedy to further their geopolitical ambitions. The controversy extends to the rhetoric and actions of David Ben-Gurion, particularly concerning anti-Semitism. His statements, particularly those made shortly before Adolf Hitler's rise to power, have been scrutinized for their lack of condemnation of Hitler's anti-Semitic policies. This absence of public censure has led to speculations about possible tacit understandings or even direct communications between Zionist leaders and hostile regimes. Moreover, Ben-Gurion's use of the term "save" in relation to the Jewish plight, preceding the full realization of the Holocaust, is seen by some as indicative of a narrative predetermined by Zionist leaders. This interpretation suggests that they viewed the impending calamity as unavoidable and sought to exploit it strategically. Hence, the Evian Conference, which was convened to address the Jewish refugee crisis, further illuminates this complex narrative. At this conference, Zionist groups reportedly lobbied against rescue efforts that did not align with their aim of settling refugees in Palestine. This stance, documented in various historical accounts and even acknowledged in pro-Zionist literature, underscores the singularity of their focus. The aftermath of the Holocaust and the forced expulsion of the Palestinians revealed a continuation of this alleged strategy. Faced with the preference of European Jews for migration to the Americas rather than Palestine, Ben-Gurion and his associates are accused of orchestrating a crisis among Arab Jews. This purported strategy aimed to populate the nascent Jewish state with Jews from Arab lands, further complicating the geopolitical and demographic landscape of the region. So, where and when this whole thing about emancipating the Jewish people to Palestine began? While John Nelson Darby, Edward Irving and Louis Way can be credited with laying the foundations of what would be known as Christian Zionism, William Heckler is the first to connect with Theodor Herzl, a visionary journalist advocating for a Jewish state and the founder of Zionism. It was a meeting that would alter the course of history. Heckler, upon learning of Herzl's aspirations, recognized a divine synchronicity. Here was the political leader who could actualize the prophecies he so deeply believed in. With a heart full of conviction and a mind brimming with ideas, Heckler extended his hand in friendship and support to Herzl. This alliance bridged the theological aspirations of Christian Zionism with the political ambitions of Jewish Zionism. This will explain why Theodor Herzl, who was not religious but rather superstitious, decided to take this man seriously. Herzl recorded the following in his diary. Meeting with Heckler on the 10th of March 1896. The Reverend William Heckler, chaplain of the English embassy here, meaning Vienna, came to see me. A sympathetic, gentle fellow with the long grey beard of a prophet. He is enthusiastic about my solution of the Jewish question. He also considers my movement a prophetic turning point, which he had foretold 2 years before. From a prophecy in the time of Omar, 637 CE, the second caliph after the death of Prophet Muhammad, he had reckoned that at the end of 42 prophetic months, a total of 1260 years, the Jews would get Palestine back. The year he calculated this to happen was 1897 to 98. In March 1897, the year Heckler anticipated the Jews would begin returning to Palestine, Herzl described their second meeting at Heckler's apartment. I was amazed to find books from floor to ceiling, nothing but Bibles, and a large military staff map of Palestine made up of 4 sheets covering the entire floor of the study. He showed me where, according to his calculations, our new temple must be located in Bethel. He also showed me models of the ancient temple. "We have prepared the ground for you," Heckler said triumphantly. I take him for a naive visionary, however. There is something charming about his enthusiasm. He gives me excellent advice, full of unmistakable genuine goodwill. He is clever, mystical, cunning and naive. Fast forward to the biggest Palestinian catastrophe, the Nakba, a complex and strategic maneuver unfolded in the Arab world, one that would significantly shape the region's future. This strategy, attributed to David Ben-Gurion and his associates, was a response to a critical realization. The majority of European Jews, in the aftermath of World War II, were choosing to immigrate to the Americas, preferring the prospects of life among Gentiles over settlement in the relatively undeveloped lands of Palestine. This preference presented a formidable challenge to the Zionist vision of establishing a Jewish majority in Palestine. The response, allegedly orchestrated by Ben-Gurion and his cohorts, was not only strategic but also deeply Machiavellian. It involved the deliberate exacerbation of anti-Semitism to provoke a crisis among Jewish refugees. This crisis was intended to bolster the case for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, a necessity perceived by Zionist leaders as critical for the survival and prosperity of the Jewish people. Ben-Gurion's callous vision was encapsulated in his own words during a 1938 Mapai Central Committee meeting, when he said, "If I knew that it was possible to save all the children of Germany by transporting them to England and only half by transferring them to the land of Israel, I would choose the latter." These words reflect a commitment to the Zionist cause, which superseded other humanitarian considerations, emphasizing the establishment of a Jewish state as the ultimate solution to the Jewish question. This ruthless stance led to opposition towards rescue operations outside the Zionist framework, which Ben-Gurion dismissed as witch doctor's medicine. Such operations, he believed, would perpetuate the Jewish people's misery by offering temporary solutions that did not address the need for a Jewish state. This belief, particularly strong in the early years of the Nazi regime, prompted Ben-Gurion and like-minded leaders to oppose rescue efforts that could have provided immediate relief to Jews facing persecution. This will take us to Arthur James Balfour, the architect of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, who was raised in an evangelical home. His sympathetic stance towards Zionism was influenced by dispensational teaching. He viewed history as an instrument for carrying out a divine purpose. This eventually led to a strong bond with Chaim Weizmann, then a chemistry professor at Manchester University, started regular discussions with Balfour about achieving this objective. After a meeting with Weizmann on January 9th, 1906, Balfour wrote to his wife, mentioning that he saw no political difficulty about obtaining Palestine, only economic ones. Balfour was persuaded by Weizmann that other proposed locations for a Jewish homeland, such as Uganda or Argentina, were not viable. Balfour's niece recalled him saying shortly before his death, "The Jewish form of patriotism was unique. Their love of their country refused to be satisfied by the Uganda scheme." It was Weizmann's absolute refusal even to look at it that impressed me. The plot for a British endorsement of Zionism began in early 1917, involving Lord Balfour, then the British Foreign Secretary, other British government members, and representatives of the Zionist organisation. This endorsement, however, came at a profound cost. It signified the dispossession of land from its rightful Palestinian owners, a stark illustration of proxy colonialism in the guise of diplomatic support. At the time, the Jewish population in Palestine was less than 10% compared to the Palestinian majority, highlighting the inherent imbalance and injustice in this promise. Moving to David Ben-Gurion, a central figure in the Zionist movement, exemplified the movement's often brutal pragmatism. His attitude towards the Jewish children airlifted to Britain after the Kristallnacht pogrom in late 1938 was one of cold indifference, if not outright hostility. Ben-Gurion, 4 years ahead of Hitler in terms of endangering Europe's Jews, saw these rescue efforts as distractions from the larger goal of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. The Zionist movement, under his leadership, never extended gratitude to the British for their response to the pogrom, a telling omission that spoke volumes about their priorities. Now we arrive at the treacherous role of King Abdullah ibn Hussein of Transjordan, who was equally complex and controversial. Abdullah, in his quest for power and territorial expansion, engaged in secret agreements with the Zionist movement. These secret pacts not only furthered his ambitions but also crushed the Palestinian aspirations for sovereignty. His collusion with Golda Meir, leading to the partition of Palestine, was a betrayal of the Palestinian cause, cloaked in diplomatic pragmatism. Abdullah's early negotiations in the 1930s was a strategic move to strengthen his territorial claims. These secretive meetings with Zionist emissaries, exchanging support for Jewish immigration, for financial backing and international advocacy, laid the groundwork for future alliances with the new Jewish state. Learning from Emir Faisal's tragedy with the British government, he knew what's the right thing to do, which is not to advocate for the Palestinians, just for himself and his extended family. As the world watched the events in Palestine unfold, Abdullah and the Jewish Agency developed a partnership based on monetary exchanges and mutual support. This relationship culminated in a firm agreement that partitioned Palestine, severing the fabric of Palestinian unity. Abdullah's vow to never wage war against the Jews hinted at a deeper and more enduring pact of collaboration, revealing the extent of his duplicity and cunning. This period in history witnessed these leaders engage in actions that were brutal in their impact and execution. The rights, aspirations, and even the very existence of the Palestinian people and others who stood in the way of the Zionist agenda were frequently trampled upon. Land confiscations, forced displacements, and a general disdain for the plight of those who opposed them were hallmarks of this era, which takes us back to the actions of these Zionist leaders whose tactics are not merely political maneuvers, but were often steeped in a kind of violence that left deep and enduring scars on the region. They pursued their vision with a ferocity that paid little heed to the ethical considerations or the humanitarian cost. The legacy of these actions has profoundly shaped the course of history in the Arab world, leaving a trail of devastation which continues to this day. The impact of these decisions, made in the name of establishing a Jewish state, continues to echo through the years, serving as a stark reminder of the brutal extent to which political ambitions can be pursued. This chapter of history stands as a testament to the often harrowing cost of nation building, especially when such endeavors are carried out with a disregard for the fundamental rights and dignities of others. The story of the Zionist movement during this period is not just a tale of political success. It is also a narrative of the immense human suffering and ethical compromises that accompanied the realization of their goals. Beginning with the Deir Yassin massacre, which stands as one of the most harrowing episodes in the history of Palestine. It was a brutal testament to the ruthlessness of the Zionist ideology. In this small village, the bloodiest atrocity of the period unfolded, perpetrated by the Irgun and Stern gang. The Haganah, the main Jewish defense force, also played a complicit role, with its Jerusalem commander, David Shaltiel, tacitly endorsing the attack, despite Deir Yassin's non-aggression pact with the Haganah. The assault, a part of Operation Nachshon, was marked by a chilling disregard for human life, sparing neither men, women, children, nor the elderly. As reported by the New York Times, approximately 120 men and women from the IZL and Lehi, they initiated the assault on Deir Yassin. The Haganah's involvement extended to supplying ammunition and mortar cover, further implicating them in the ensuing carnage. The brutality of the massacre was unsparing and indiscriminate. The attackers paraded some of the captives through the streets of Jerusalem in a grotesque victory convoy, only to return them to the village and execute them. The final toll was a staggering 245 murdered, including numerous women and children. Then, in a macabre display of criminality, the perpetrators later hosted US correspondents detailing their actions over tea and cookies. They boasted of blowing up houses and launching grenades, all under the guise of gaining control of the village. The Haganah's later occupation of Dar Yassin did little to mitigate the horror of the massacre, with their hollow promise to maintain the graves and return property to the owners when the time is right. The Dar Yassin massacre, alongside 70 other documented massacres, precipitated a mass exodus of Palestinians who fled their homes to escape similar fate. This marked the beginning of an enduring Palestinian ordeal spanning nearly 8 decades, characterized by displacement, suffering, and an unceasing quest for justice and return. This dark chapter in history has prompted many Jewish historians to re-evaluate the long-standing Zionist denial of such expulsions and the war crimes committed over decades. The brutal tactics employed by the Zionists, driven by a relentless pursuit of their ultimate goal, laid bare the extent of their depravity and the human cost of their ambitions. One of the most ironic tragedies in this painful chapter, Jewish historians often reminisce about the Jewish Golden Age, not in Europe or America, but in Muslim-ruled Spain, Turkey, Morocco, Tunis, Egypt, and Iraq. This selective memory highlights the inherent contradiction in Zionist ideology, which sought to establish a Jewish state at the expense of the same people who once gave them a place to call home, a place where they prospered and thrived.